We are going there today, and Brooke Bralove is going to help us figure this all out. Brooke, I'm so glad you're on the show today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
Well, I can't tell you how many times my friends, women in their 40s and 50s, have come to me and said, I have no desire to have sex anymore, like not even a little bit. And I understand, like, I feel like that happened to me. My sex drive literally exited stage left one day, no warning. It was just totally gone, like not a little bit here, like gone. And, the natural next question is, gosh, like, how is this going to affect my relationship? And then is this it for me? Like, am I never going to want to have sex again? Which one of my friends said to me, and I was like, oh my God, this is heartbreaking. And there can be certain root causes for this that we will talk about in a little bit. But I did first just want to talk about for those of us who've been in these relationships for a long time, there has to be like some familiarity issue involved here, right? Like, is that part of what's driving this? And how do we know if it's that and maybe it's just a rut versus like, oh no, this is a deeper issue that I need to address?
Well, certainly I see people all the time in my office when I'm doing sex therapy and the most common thing women come in with is low libido, low desire. So, first of all, I think it's so important that we just name that it's pretty universal. I don't really think there's a woman who has never ever experienced that over a lifetime, especially if she's in a long-term relationship. And you mentioned familiarity, and that really matters, right? So in some ways, there ends up being too much safety sometimes in long-term marriages. And it's sort of like you need emotional safety, but when it's too safe, like you're always there, you're always in the kitchen and you're always in the bedroom and you never travel, so I see you all the time. That familiarity is not very erotic. So eroticism needs some mystery, some uncertainty. And when you're in a marriage for, 20 years, it's a lot of certainty. In fact, you
Hopefully.
can usually, right. And again, while that provides emotional safety, it just doesn't translate to eroticism. And so people, if they lose their libido, will often say, oh my gosh, am I not in love with, my partner anymore? And that's actually rarely the case. If it is, probably want to get out of that relationship potentially. But when you've lost it in midlife, it usually has to do with things becoming routine, boring, same old script, same old sexual script, and same old annoying habits. Like I always tell people, it's really hard. Can I curse on here?
Hell yes.
Okay, it's really hard to want to fuck someone when they've just cut their toenails on your shared bed. Right? Like, is anyone going to argue
Should our
with that?
husbands listen to this episode?
Exactly. And so, when you're grossed out and then it's like, hey, you want to have sex? The answer is going to be, hell no. I need to distance myself from the toenail incident to find anything, sort of erotic. And so yeah, go ahead.
Is newness our friend? Is this why we're hearing like role playing and bringing in toys and things like that is a good thing because it brings in that mystery and new feeling and eroticism back?
Yes, newness is really important. I find that when people find something that, quote, works, like you get on top of me and I use vibrator for 5 minutes and I have an orgasm. And again, clearly robotic voice is on purpose, right? There's no newness. It's so predictable. But what we loved about early dating, or, even when we might not have been dating someone, but we were looking for someone, is that uncertainty, that newness, that surprise. And so that's not going to come naturally. That's not going to come without real effort. So doing things like, I plan a date, you plan a date, or let's get dressed in separate rooms and let's meet up in, the foyer before we go out so that I didn't see what underwear you have on underneath your sexy black dress, or I don't know what what cologne you put on and I can't wait. We're animals. We want pheromones. We want newness because that is something we're attracted to. And once you put that in and you've already got the emotional safety, that's usually the recipe for wonderful pleasure and eroticism. But you got to put effort. It's like somehow we think you should work at relationships in every way. We should work on communication. We should work on supporting each other's dreams. We should work on figuring out shared activities. But somehow sex is supposed to be just this magical thing. And it sets us up for feeling less than and really self-doubting what is just kind of normal.
Yeah, and thank you for normalizing that. And you're right. We are just animals at the end of the day. And you're touching on something that I wanted to ask about, which was this concept of spontaneous desire and our expectation that that's how it's going to be all the time. And I mean, I listened to you on another podcast and totally caught myself saying, oh my God, this is part of my problem, is that I think that desire is going to be spontaneous for both of us at the exact same time. And that's just totally unrealistic. I loved the example that you gave, which was even when you were dating and you were calling that spontaneous, it was not spontaneous. You had that date planned for at least 2 weeks, let's say. And like 3 days before, you went and groomed yourself, and then you bought a new outfit and you got all ready like that. There's nothing spontaneous about that. So how can we bring what's the opposite of like planned desire? Like how can we bring that into our relationship in a way that doesn't feel robotic?
So I believe that planned sex actually increases in the moment spontaneity. And I know that sounds sort of counterintuitive. Like, and you know, I work with a lot of heterosexual couples, so I'm going to mostly be talking about that. A lot of the men just groan when the word scheduling comes up, right? But when you value something, you schedule it. If you really value this, then why wouldn't you have to schedule it? And this is where the brain matters so much, because especially a woman's brain, she cannot transition from infant puking on my sweater, still have to write 3 emails, and then, wait, I also need to have sex right now, and I have to transition quickly. So it's unfair to think that you can do that. So when you plan it, you're actually you're setting the stage so that you can be fully present in the experience. Being embodied during sex is the key, getting out of your monkey mind and getting into your body. So I think spontaneous is kind of a myth, from the get-go, but it really is harmful, because what we know about arousal and desire is that often, we wait around to be in the mood. Well, that's really hard for a working mom of 3 to just spontaneously be in the mood. But when we tell her, hey, honey, I'm going to do the dishes tonight. Why don't you go take a bath? Why don't you spend some alone time? Why don't you, do something fun for yourself? That is the transition that a lot of women need in order to get present. But it's
also really sexy when you step up and do some housework or childcare work.
100%. I mean, what is foreplay to, a woman? It's you loading the dishwasher. Not just loading it, but loading it correctly, right?
That's not too much to ask.
I think you can try, but you also it has to be good enough. You just have to tolerate it being good enough, and the gesture. So women want stuff off their plate so they can find space inside their own brain to rediscover desire.
Amen.
Yeah. And it really is a gift to just say, hey, hun, I got the kids tonight. Like, we had planned to have a sexy date later, and I was thinking you might want a little alone time beforehand. And it makes a difference. And she's much more willing to show up enthusiastically rather than simply dreading, oh my God, is he going to initiate tonight? Oh gosh, I hope he doesn't initiate, and then you're just kind of dreading it. And so often women's bodies, they just get real tight, like, because they don't want to.
But I want to talk about that because I think it's pretty common for one person to have the desire and the other not, and the other to just kind of, I hate to use the word concede, but that's kind of what's happening. I was thinking about this when I was coming up with questions for you. I'm like, how damaging could that be if you keep doing that over time? I mean, that's going to lead to resentment, if nothing else, not to mention maybe like some trauma when your body's experiencing something that you don't want to be experiencing.
Yeah, so I want to differentiate between the feeling of I literally do not want to be sexual right now. That is clear. But for a lot of women, it's sort of like, well, I want to have sex, and I know it's good for the relationship. I know we feel closer to each other after. I know once we get started, it's going to be fine, even enjoyable, is what I call the willingness to try. So some language that can be more useful is not, do you want to have sex? Because a lot of women are going to say no. But the invitation is, are you willing to try for 10 minutes and just see what's there? And so if you start with, just sort of erotic touch or some foreplay, then you often will transition. Because for most women in long-term relationships, arousal has to come before desire. So we can't wait for lightning to strike that we're going to just be in the mood. We have to get ourselves going physically. Because once you find that something's actually kind of pleasurable, the desire will come after that. And you are right that resentment kills libido like a motherfucker.
You heard it here first, people.
I've never seen someone who can feel resentful and be willing to be vulnerable sexually at the exact same time. And so, yes, that will build and grow certainly if the woman's not getting anything out of it. So if she's actually not even having pleasure, then she's going to be even more resentful. But that's where, you've got to decrease the resentment by saying, what do you need from me, honey? How can I help you? And a lot of men just aren't willing to do that, frankly.
Well, that's a shame. Because I also think, like, circling back to what we were saying, it's the smallest things that could actually lead to desire, like loading the dishwasher. Or, I mean, for me, it's picking up some of the childcare stuff without me asking you to do it. So just noticing I am feeling really overloaded and what a huge relief it would be for me if you showered them tonight, not me. Like that to me is huge because it makes me feel seen, validated, and like I'm in a partnership. And that's sexy to me.
It is sexy. I want to challenge you on one piece of that, though.
Do it.
Which is that if we are waiting around to see if our partner notices our distress or stress or overload, and they don't, that is actually testing them in a way that I don't know is always fair. And frankly, they're usually going to fail at it. So are you saying, I would like some help and this would free me up to tune more into my erotic self? Would you be willing to do that? I think it's okay to ask. And frankly, a lot of women are just not willing to do it. And I think they're going to be unhappy for a long time because we have to ask for what we want.
Oh, gosh, totally. And I know. And believe me, I've done years of therapy and working on that because I came from a place where I was, on my soapbox saying like, I shouldn't have to ask for anything. You should just know. And if you don't, then you're not the right partner for me. Like I actually thought that in my 20s and I've come a long way. And I totally see how that's unfair now, especially like being on the other side of it. I have no idea what's in your brain and what you're thinking unless you tell me. So I agree that it needs to be communicated, but I guess I was just saying this from the standpoint that like we've had these conversations many times and like, what would take this off me. And then to just see it in the moment and offer to do it is it's just, to me, like that's what I'm thinking. Look, that's one of the sexiest things my husband can do right now is just take some of that load off.
I literally remember when I'm divorced, but when I was married, I remember there was this one time where he offered to clean up, the kitchen or something. And I literally was like instantly turned on. I mean, it's actually amazing. And so we've got to attend to women's mental state in order to create space for eroticism in their brain and in their body.
Totally agree. And as an Enneagram 5, and I used to call myself, what was the term? Sapiosexual. Like, I'm really attracted to someone who's really intelligent. So you're talking my language when you're speaking in those terms. I do want to get back to the root cause that we talked about at the very beginning. So a lot of us are hearing like, okay, well, you have a low libido because your quote unquote sex hormones are declining. And so if you just replace those, you're going to be great and it will come back. And I think for a lot of people, it really does help. But I think you make an interesting point that that's not always the only issue going on and that there could be other things. So tell us what you see in your practice as other reasons why low libido may be happening.
So again, resentment is number one for me. I don't think you can talk enough about, and it's the resentment that's not getting spoken, right? It's not, it's unmet needs that turn into resentment, but you're not usually speaking them. Or maybe you've spoken them 8,000 times and now you're just tired, of doing that. So resentment is key. Sheer exhaustion. We are tired. We're a tired society. Women are really still doing every single thing they used to do and more. And so just sheer fatigue. When people say, I'm just too tired, I understand that. Now, there needs to be an adaptation around that, so maybe you don't, start foreplay at 11 p.m. when your bedtime was 10. So I do think you got to take that into account that, know yourself. Like, I am tired at 9 p.m. Well, that means that you need to be scheduling sex at 7 or at 8. So again, I think, you got to take responsibility. But I also think there are kind of things that get in the way around maybe even unknown trauma. And so, most women, unfortunately, have been coerced into sex at some point. And I'm not even saying a full-blown sexual assault, but I think it's hard to find a woman who hasn't had the experience of having sex when they really didn't feel like it or want to. When you do that over and over again, you are basically telling your brain that this is not safe and I'm doing something that my nervous system wants to shut down around. Well, if you end up literally dissociating or shutting down or going somewhere, else in your mind, and you do that over and over again, that is literally going to, for instance, tighten your pelvic floor. It can lead to, painful intercourse because the body doesn't feel safe. So, literally a vagina needs to open up to accept, a dildo, a vibrator, a penis, fingers, whatever it is. And it can't do that if it always feels like it's compromising itself or it's doing something kind of really that they don't feel like doing. And so all these little things, repetitively over time. Then there's also what does, happen, which is big T sexual trauma. And sometimes people aren't either, they may not remember it, or they may not be aware, or they may have downplayed that it was a sexual assault. I see so many women who will not use the word sexual assault, based on something that happened in college. And when you dig deeper, it really was a sexual assault. They have not registered that, and they need permission to be validated in that way. That actually what happened was not what you wanted. And that will show up in the body and in the brain around connection and intimacy.
I think too, like the word shame is coming up. A lot of us, like super high capacity, high achieving midlife women that can get everything done, don't necessarily want the identity of being the victim of a sexual assault. I think that might be another reason why it's hard to categorize it that way.
Nobody wants to join that club. Nobody. But what I do find is when I give permission to people to be able to process it as something that their body did not want, then it is less about labeling it. I'm not attached to the label, but I am attached to validating that woman's experience and saying, I know, don't want to be part of this club, but it may help you have more self-compassion around why it's so difficult now. And that's what we're always trying to do. Self-compassion helps with shame. You gotta douse shame with some self-compassion around, because otherwise you're going, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? I'm a terrible wife. I'm disappointing my partner. And you're not gonna get better that way, so to speak.
And so how are you going to get better? Like, how do you help your clients who have any kind of trauma that's now showing up as not wanting to have sex?
Well, first of all, lots of psychoeducation around how a dysregulated nervous system is going to prioritize safety, survival, like dissociation or freezing, and it's not going to prioritize sensuality and pleasure because it's stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you've got to calm the nervous system. So this is where I, want to introduce this wonderful treatment modality called accelerated resolution therapy, or ART. And I am using that in my practice and can absolutely help people radically change and kind of resolve sexual trauma or other trauma. And the byproduct is often that their libido increases, their attraction for their partner increases. Some people with anorgasmia are becoming orgasmic. And some people even report just liking their partner more. And so that's pretty magical, right? A lot of women would sign up for those things.
Exactly. All right. So tell us what this is. I've done a little research on it myself, and it's fascinating.
So ART is an evidence-based treatment modality that uses rapid eye movement and something called voluntary image replacement to basically change the way the brain stores distressing images and the corresponding negative sensations that show up in the body. And we actually can do that in as few as one session, but often in 1 to 5 sessions. I mean, I have helped people resolve very traumatic sexual assault in only 2 sessions, that they are able to let go of those intrusive thoughts, intrusive images, and simply respond differently. So for a lot of people who've had sexual assault, if they ever see a TV show, a movie that has sexual assault, they are re-traumatized. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be re-traumatized. They want to just be able to watch TV. And this can allow complete neutrality toward what you experienced. And so what we say in ART is keep the knowledge, lose the pain. You're never going to forget the facts of what happened to you, but you will lose the emotional impact and those images that you often cannot get out of your mind no matter what you do, no matter how much insight-oriented psychotherapy you have. It's just not budging. And ART comes in and we give the brain something different to store instead of the trauma. And it's like, cool, let's update this. I don't want to hold on to that. Let's give ourselves a new story. And we store that in the brain and this stuff resolves on its own.
So give me more specifics. Like, are we replacing it with an image of an ice cream cone, like something that brings us joy? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, ART is very creative. And so let's take the example of years and years of painful sex, right? Maybe the person has vulvodynia or vestibulitis or some reason that sex has been painful. Well, you have to have them, you pull up those negative experiences. You have them see it. And when they see it in their mind while they're doing calming bilateral eye movements, they're very likely to have negative sensations in the body. Literally, their pelvic floor might tighten, or their chest tightens, or they begin shaking. And you basically use the calming eye movements to slowly make those more neutral, those sensations. And then you desensitize them to it. You have them see that whole scene again, that montage of painful sex. And the second time they're looking at it, it can look a little different. It's lost some of the charge, or it may feel further away or more distant. And then you ask them to direct the way they wish it had happened. So instead of seeing painful sex, they see orgasmic sex. They see desire and eroticism and deep connection. And then they store that in the brain so that the next time they go to be intimate with their partner, their brain is like, we remember this and it was pleasurable. So their pelvic floor will literally stop gripping so hard because it isn't expecting pain anymore. And it's expecting some pleasure because you just told the brain that it is pleasurable. The brain doesn't need facts, it needs a good story.
Well, I've learned that to be true because I tell myself a lot of stories and end up believing them, and they're not true at all. But in this case, so I'm thinking, okay, imagining like if there had been a very traumatic event, do you have to replace that with positive sexual images? Because you said, what did you want that to do? So I'm kind of thinking like if this were me, and it's hard to imagine because I've not experienced this, but I would maybe want to envision I never went on that date, or I said no, or I got up and left the room and slammed the door in his face. Like, could you replace it with images like that feel kind of empowering?
Percent. And that's why in an intake, I'm going to try to find what are the feelings that remain. So if someone says, I had a sexual assault and I just can't get rid of this helpless feeling, then what they are likely to do, or what I might even suggest, is that they give themselves the experience of the complete opposite. They fought the person off. They called the police. They got help. Or again, they never went to the party, or they never, started drinking that night. If they blame themselves when alcohol was present, which is often what happens. So absolutely. And the brain will show you what it needs to heal. Maybe they didn't feel protected as a child by their parents and then went on to have a sexual assault. I might say, why don't you go to the parent store and go get a better dad to come in and prevent this from ever happening? And so they often can heal some inner child wounds that they may not even know is part of the trauma. But when you make them have this better dad come in and be like, over my dead body, are you touching my daughter? That can be very healing. And so I don't always know what they need, but I can usually tell when the director part of it isn't quite right. And I'm always going to go for, what do you need to heal? Do you need to fight back? Do you need to be protected? And I will often hear a piece of that in the intake session. And that's why I have to be so attuned, because sometimes I will have to make a suggestion. And a lot of times my suggestions really help, and then they get to those positive sensations. But no, it doesn't have to be anything. A lot of the times it can just be that it never happened.
So interesting, because it sounds like this technique could work for so many different things, like you said, not just sexual trauma, but kind of rewriting our story if that's what we need in order to move forward. So for someone who did have sexual trauma and they used this therapy, what does healed look like to you? Like, what does that actually mean? How does that show up in their life?
Well, again, it depends how it's been showing up recently, but most people most people don't want to flinch when their partner kisses them on their neck. Like, that's a very common thing, right? So I have people come in and just say, it's so awful, I can't help myself, but I immediately flinch, if he surprises me or if he touches me. And they feel terrible about it. And frankly, the partners feel terrible about it. They are just trying to love their partner, and they can't do that because of the trauma. And so when it's healed, they don't respond that way. Like, all of a sudden you'll say, well, how have things been with your partner? And when you say something, they're like, oh my God, I didn't flinch the last several times he approached me. But it's like they don't even notice it when it disappears until you draw their attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a healed nervous system. And so that's going to translate into better connection, more intimacy, more pleasure, more arousal. And frankly, it's just going to be healing for the relationship because no one wants to re-traumatize their partner. They just want to be close.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Of course. I know. I think about the poor partner in that situation who doesn't know exactly what happened, doesn't necessarily know what your triggers are until it's too late. So yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we do need to wrap up, but what is one thing that listeners can do this week to improve their sex life if they're feeling low libido?
So the first thing I would say that they need to do is reconnect with themselves. They need to figure out what is actually pleasurable to them. So you have to reconnect. Sexuality comes from self. I always say to people, your sexuality is yours. Whether you choose to share that with anyone is your choice, or many people, that's your choice. At the end of the day, we have to find what is erotic inside of ourselves. So taking a bath, touching yourself, and that can be masturbation, but not necessarily. Like finding your sensuality, putting on a fragrance that you love, not for your partner. Lingerie can be for you. So what do you feel erotic wearing, touching, tasting? So doing more of that. The second thing I want to recommend is a 20-second hug with you and your partner. Research shows that a 20-second hug releases all these fabulous, endorphins. And it sounds simple, but I've been thanked repeatedly by just encouraging people to do a 20-second hug every single day. It will change things.
I'm going to make my husband listen to this because we have this long-standing joke that I have had to teach him how to hug longer. Because he'll come up and just be like, hug, okay, great, moving on. I'm like, no, it's not over yet. Just stay there. Hang on, you can do it. And like his body gets tense and he's like, wanting to run on to the next thing. And I'm 12 years in, still training him, and we're getting closer to that 20 seconds. So I'm going to make him listen to this, make him do the 20-second hug, or not make him, but invite him to do a 20-second hug with me.
And that's exactly what it is. It's an invitation.
Yeah.
And you could even try to synchronize your breath because that is emotional regulation and, nervous system regulation.
Co-regulation. So, we do that. And I'm a breathwork facilitator and we do that in breathwork.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can everybody find you and learn more about your work?
So you can find me at brookebralove.com and on Instagram and Facebook at Brooke Bralove Psychotherapy.
Wonderful. And we'll link all that up in the show notes. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks for having me.